This is the worst season in 10 years for Borussia Dortmund. And this is a young coach, as you said, who was a great player, who came in as an assistant under Terzic to, I think, almost groom him for this role. But it looks as if this role might be a little bit beyond him.
It's been quite the calendar year for Borussia Dortmund, obviously losing in the final of Champions League, and now going through a difficult period under Nuri Şahin, who obviously has been under pressure. Borussia currently sit 10th in the Bundesliga table, 9th place in the Champions League, and they have been eliminated from the DFB Pokal in the round of 32 against Wolfsburg. So to talk all about Borussia Dortmund and some of the stuff that they've been dealing with, we're going to bring in our German correspondent, Raphael Honigstein. Rafa, quickly, just want to get straight into it. Is this job too much for Nuri Şahin? Did they give him this job too early, and now that pressure that's on him, is it going to continue?
Well, it looks as if it might be the wrong decision. I think that he's certainly not the only one to blame for Borussia Dortmund's troubles. They've had lots of injuries. They've had, shall we say, mixed success in the transfer market. On paper, all their signings look like real improvements. Golazo, Anton, Pascal Gross, players who were looking to make the next step up in their development. But for one reason or another, collectively, it hasn't happened. And of course, you cannot get rid of the whole squad. The manager is the one who comes under pressure. And what's happened this season is sort of the reverse of what happened last season. Last season, you remember, we saw the pictures. Edin Terzic was kind of saved by the fact that Dortmund made it into the Champions League final. Domestically, 5th place was already an underachievement. It didn't matter all that much because by some quirk, it was enough to get into the Champions League again, which this year most certainly won't be. And Dortmund now, of course, 10th. Now, the Champions League might just about save Nuri Şahin because Dortmund are going pretty well, and a win would put them in a real solid position as far as direct qualification is concerned in Bologna. But at the same time, a bad result there, I think, might spell the end for Nuri Şahin because domestically the form has been absolutely abysmal.
Let's talk about that real quickly because they are obviously on the road and their Bundesliga form on the road is really rough. It's been terrible. They've won one game on the road in the Bundesliga, which is disastrous form. And in many ways, for a club the size of Borussia Dortmund, he probably would have already been gone had he not been so well thought of by the club and in some ways protected. What do you put that away form down, and what kind of a performance are you expecting from Borussia Dortmund against Bologna?
I think what happens is that away from football, away from their own home, the flaws and the fault lines in this team just become more apparent. Signal Iduna Park papers over the cracks, the noise, the atmosphere. They've won games where they should have dropped points. A lot of those performances at home have also been deeply unconvincing, but it gave them a little bit extra to get them better results. But when they don't have that, then things are pretty bleak, and that's been brutally exposed, I think, in the league. Consider this. We all remember Klopp's last season where they were bottom of the table in Christmas and then rallied and came back to finish 7th. But it was a poor season. Of course, Klopp left at the end of that in 14-15. This is the worst season since. So this is the worst season in 10 years for Borussia Dortmund. And this is a young coach, as you said, who was a great player, who came in as an assistant under Terzic to, I think, almost groom him for this role. But it looks as if this role might be a little bit beyond him. Mm-hmm. And he cannot deal with the problems that are not solely of his making, but he hasn't been part of the solution either.
Interesting. It's something to watch for sure with this Borussia Dortmund side, whether they have enough to not just win a trophy, but if Şahin will be able to save his job and stay at this club. Here are some of the German teams that are in the Champions League this week. Bayer Leverkusen and Atletico Madrid. That is a tasty matchup. Borussia Dortmund, we just spoke about, and they'll be traveling to Bologna. Slovan Bratislava against Stuttgart, and Feyenoord and Bayern Munich. Let's talk about Bayer Leverkusen, because, okay, it's not an undefeated season, so clearly those aspirations, we couldn't expect that 2 years in a row. But have this Bayer Leverkusen side, especially with their run as of late, 13 unbeaten, have they been the best German club overall this season?
I think they're second best, as the table would suggest.
No, it's fair.
But
it's fair.
they have been very solid, especially in the second half of the first half of the season. And it was really interesting because a lot of people, and I would include myself in that, said, oh, the magic has gone a little bit, and they now kind of dropped the points that it didn't drop last season, where they had this incredible run, and maybe everyone else is trying a little bit harder, and maybe they themselves feel just a little bit, I don't want to say overly confident, but maybe they bought into their own sort of mythology. And I spoke to Granit Xhaka after the win against Inter just before Christmas, and he said, you know what, actually, it looked as if we'd lost a little bit of the hunger. If everyone was doing just a little bit less, thinking we are champions, we can win games, we can do it. And I think that hunger and that commitment, and also ultimately the confidence now has oozed back into this team, and they now look like they're not going to drop many points domestically, and I think even in the Champions League they look like a serious contender. Maybe not to go all the way, but you wouldn't be surprised if they made it into the last 8, or maybe even into the semi-final. So they refound the balance, the belief, the resilience, all these things we talked about ad nauseum last season. It's back, and that's why they're pushing this Bayern team really hard, and I think that's why they're also in a great position to finish top 8 in the Champions League.
Yeah, it's not bad if you win 12 games on the bounce. I'm sure there's a pretty penny for bonuses along the way as well for a lot of those players. Now, you mentioned something really interesting, the second best German team in European football. And of course, you're going to be at the game between Feyenoord and Bayern Munich coming up. And this is a big game for Bayern Munich. They need to get back to winning ways, obviously, in European competition, but also to try and get themselves away from this playoff and get themselves into the direct 8 that go through to the next round. How do you think Bayern Munich will get the job done? What makes them so special?
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, they've been playing catch-up since those 2 defeats against Villa and Barcelona back in October. And ever since then, every game has been a must-win game for them. And the pressure's been on. They've coped with it really well. They look good against Benfica, look good against PSG. They're back on course of doing it. But this is, on paper, the last tricky assignment. The next game is Slovan Bratislava at home. I think we can expect 3 points there, but these are the 3 points they really, really must get if they want to have a serious chance of making the top 8. So it's an absolutely crucial game. It's a huge game. What's going in their favor is at the moment, they are with a good momentum. You have a team that has lots of different goal scorers. Harry Kane scores from penalties, doesn't score so many from open play, but you have Goretzka popping up with goals. You have Coman, you have Gnabry coming back. You will have Musiala back in the starting 11. You have Michael Olise playing really, really decently. And that sort of collective strength that they have found under Kompany, I think puts them in a strong position, even in a very hostile and difficult atmospheres that the Kuip will provide. I'm really looking forward to the game for that reason alone. But Bayern, I think, will have just a little bit too much against the Feyenoord side that are not exactly firing on all cylinders and have their own problems. I think Bayern should just about do it.
Hey, Rafa, I'm really excited for you, the fact you're going to be in Rotterdam, because I think this is going to be an important game for Vincent Kompany in particular. But obviously I'm recognising it now. Maybe we've got a title race back on our hands with Leverkusen in the form that they're in domestically. But Bayern Munich not necessarily at 100%. Would you agree with me that Bayern are not necessarily playing their best football just yet? And what would happen? What would happen, Rafa, if Vincent Kompany failed to win the Bundesliga and failed to win a Champions League trophy this year? They're already out of the German Cup.
I mean, it would be a disaster for Bayern and ultimately, of course, for everyone, the players and the coaching staff, if they don't win the title for a second year running. I think they're playing pretty good football. Yes, there are still levels to go. And some of the games, I think the scorelines are perhaps not quite as clear-cut as the balance of play. Bayern create a lot of chances and they concede very few chances. If it's then only a 1-0 or 3-2, it looks as if it's a bit edgy. But actually, if they take their chances a bit better, I think we see bigger results coming in. And I'm sort of quite confident that we'll see their best come to the fore when they go into this run of really difficult games with Frankfurt and Stuttgart, and then, of course, Leverkusen coming up. I think the real Bayern will have to show up, and I think they'll actually show their best football then.
It'll be real interesting, definitely interesting to watch. Our Bundesliga correspondent Raphael Honigstein joining us here on Scoreline. Thank you.
Sehr gut, Junge.
Thank you.